Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a bestseller and inspire you to start, finish and publish your book. I'm Mark Stay.
And I'm Mark DeVoe. And before we dive into this week's wonderful episode, we'd like to thank all of our sponsors. That's everyone listening to the show, all of our academates and our wonderful patrons who keep this podcast on the road. And this week we've had quite a few patrons jump in, Mark, haven't we?
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, please be standing and charge your glasses for Andy Livingston, Jenny Morris, Elaine Hastings, Anna Garcia Garnett, and Claire Sewell. You are all gods among all mortals, mere mortals. We love you all. Thank you so much. And seriously, without your support, we could not keep the podcast going. So we thank you sincerely from the bottom of our hearts.
Absolutely. Thank you very, very much. And if you would like to join that wonderful group of merry men and women, please come along to bestsellerexperiment.com/support. Now, Mr. Stay, I'm surprised you're not laid back on a bed, taking it easy this week after a bonkers book launch last week. But here you are, upright and still smiling.
Yes, it's been a whirlwind of a week. It's been such good fun because we've got so we had the live launch for the Crow Folk, which was just extraordinary. Queeve MacDonald came on. There's no D at the end of his name. He came on. He was MC. He was just brilliant. He's dressed like a scarecrow. It was just fantastic. We had people dressing up in 1940s home front stuff, just as the invite suggested. We had Ian W. Sainsbury seeing us out with a proper 1940s Knees Up with Knees Up Mother Brown. Actually, he ended with We'll Meet Again, which people got back to me and said they were in tears. They were tearing up because we're all still in lockdown over here and we will meet again some sunny day, but God only knows when that's going to be.
Do you know, I hadn't even made I hadn't even made that connection. I joined the party and I got to say, the thing I thought was so cool is you had a live feed with the BBC radio, Ken. I mean, that was amazing. How that even happened technologically, I have no idea. I'm like, hang on a minute. You've got a guy live on air at BBC Kent, and he's joined you on your live stream, but you're chatting with him on the radio. It was a complete, it was genius. And I was like, this actually worked. I mean, I think back to our early days when we were trying to press buttons and oh no, look, can you see me?
Yeah. No, it was great. We really there was Dominic King at the BBC, who's been on the podcast before because we did a live show from Harbour Books in Whitstable, and he joined us on that as well, which was really good fun. But it was great because I'm at the table here, which is my podcasting table. I've got my writing table over there. Ooh, get me! He's got two tables.
Look at you, two bloody tables, mate. But, table envy.
I know, Mark. Two tables stay, and. Emily was over there with a fella Kai, and they were using StreamYard, which we've used in the Bestseller Experiment Facebook group to do live chats with some of the experiments there. And it's a lovely piece of kit. It's really nice. It's like live TV in that, the controller can see 3 cameras, and it's like, go to camera 1, go to camera 2, run a banner with the email address across the bottom, run the head, and it's great. And so Emily was there pushing buttons, running the whole show. It was just fantastic. It was so slick, and it's so easy to use.
It's quite bonkers when you think about it. I mean, when we kind of joke about what we do putting together a podcast, it's actually like doing a radio show. And when you think about all the work that goes into radio shows, that's really what a podcast is. But now you kind of moved on to broadcasting with titles, and it was super slick. I love where this is going. I mean, I love particularly where this is going for authors. The opportunities now of what we can actually do for a book launch. I mean, we've had a lot of people on the show. I mean, you talked a lot about kind of the idea of launching a book, and I know on one of the discussions you had with Queeve on the session was that this is now the way in which everyone should really be doing it. I mean, even if it's just a private party with friends and family, everyone should be doing this because it's such a wonderful celebration and a connection as well. It's that human element to see you all, to hear everything, to see all the comments. It's such an event, which is so much bigger than just, my book's on the shelf in a local bookstore.
Well, I mean, listeners, go back and listen to the episode we did with Mark Edwards, and I'll put a link in the show notes so you can seek it out. I mean, you remember Mark was probably the first author that we knew of that did these live events, and long before lockdown or any of that palaver. And it was one of those things, you saw Mark doing it. And I think because he had a young family, he didn't want to have book launches or whatever, so he could do it from home. And the kids all came in, and it was very much a family affair. And all his readers, and you're making that connection with your readers that you might not otherwise make. And I remember looking at Mark thinking, that's great. It's really unique. It's interesting. Maybe in a few years, authors will be doing. And of course, lockdown has really pushed the accelerator down on all of that. And I've seen a lot of authors, traditionally published authors in particular, who might normally go to festivals or bookshop signings, who are thinking, okay, how do I reach my readers now? I mean, Rowan Coleman, who was on a few episodes ago, she's written these books about the Bronte sisters solving mysteries. So she does readings from Jane Eyre on her Instagram channel. So it's that thing of finding what the connection is with your readers, and then making it online. And because of lockdown, there's been a big boom in all these kind of video and audio technologies, these live streaming technologies. It used to be quite tricky and fiddly, but now it's made pretty easy.
It is one of the actual benefits of lockdown. I mean, we know we focus on obviously all the challenges, but when you think about this, I think there's been a lot more creativity that's come out of the fact that people have been restricted. But the crazy thing is that when you actually think, you think about it from a music perspective, obviously playing live, that's a huge loss, like to people in the music industry right now. That's a huge part of their life. But for authors, we're not necessarily the most kind of like out and about kind of people. And when we're launching books, at the very highest level, you might do a personal book tour of some big bookstores and do book signings and things. But for most authors, it is kind of a localized, if anything, your local bookstore maybe. But now when you see that people are thinking, well, I can do this, everyone can do this. It's not restricted to major publishers. I can do my own launch party. It's actually forced people to get so much more creative. And I think, I've always said, what are going to be the benefits of this crazy period that we're experiencing? There's always an upside to every downside. And I think one of the upsides is we're not going to lose any of this when we're all back out, like hugging and playing in playgrounds and enjoying like social life again, post COVID. I do think that there's going to be a lot of things we're going to keep from this. And from a writing perspective, that makes the opportunities available to indie authors in particular. Well, and every author really. Let's face it. Every author has to do their bit now, whether, like you said, you're signed to Simon & Schuster for this book, but you were working harder than you ever have for a book launch, right? So I'm excited to see what's going to happen. I really do think it's going to be a lot of benefits. Well,
my big concern is Simon & Schuster very early on, they identified the high street as my main route to market, so it was very much going to be an Indies and Waterstones in the UK, so independent bookshops, Waterstones, big bookshop chain. And of course, they're all shut. And I was thinking, how do we pivot? And the good thing is a lot of indie bookshops are operating on click and collect. They have websites and what have you. And of course, there's things like the Hive in the UK, which is one of the ways you can support independent bookshops and shop online. So I'm book of the month for February.
I want to ask you about
Hive.
that. Yeah. Well, let's dive into that, because I know the word on everyone's lips, like having listened to the episode 2 weeks ago when we were kind of doing the just before the launch. How did it go? Like, what was the outcome of the launch? You mentioned about the Hive. So tell us a bit about what happened with the Hive.
Well, Hive, they announced on Monday their charts. I'm in the top 20. I'm number 14.
Wow. Who are you chasing down? Who are the people you're kind of trying to leapfrog?
Well, of course, Richard Osman is number one, So he's number one
Richard, you watch your back, mate. Meister Stay is on you. Richard Osman, for anyone who doesn't know this, I don't know how big this book is outside of the UK. I'm assuming it's probably quite big. Yeah. But in the UK, this has been the phenomenon over the last few months. It was the biggest selling book at Christmas. I think it broke some crazy records, didn't it, in terms of the fastest selling book?
Sales are just breathtaking.
And this is a guy, for people that don't know, this is a guy who is it, I'm in Canada. Is he still doing the show on Channel 4?
Yeah. Pointless is the big show.
Shout out to my mum who loves that show, by the way. Hi,
and Richard Osman's what's it called, Big Game Night or whatever it is. I love that. I watch those every day. But yeah, he's just got this great mind, and he signed this book deal, and it's just he has sort of almost national treasure status over here. So everyone just ran out and bought it. It's a lovely thriller. So,
but Richard doesn't need any more publication. What I want to know, Mark, publicity. I want to know how it went for you last week. So you hit the top 20 in the Hive, which is the national independent book charts. Is that right?
Kind of, yes. I mean, not every indie has signed up to Hive.
Okay.
Independents are independents. I mean, I remember when Hive first started, it was like, wrangling cats. Independents will do their own thing. Some were interested, some weren't, and that's still the case, I think. In the States, they've launched something similar, bookshop.org, which is launched in the UK as well. So you've got that over here now too. But Hive was, as far as I know, one of the first ones to do this kind of thing. And they do it really well because they work in association with Gardners, who's one of the biggest independent book wholesalers in the UK, who supply everyone. Right. Amazon, Indies, Waterstones, they just supply everyone. And so it's kind of, a lot of the major indies will be signed up to Hive. So it's been great because my big worry was, are we actually going to, have anywhere open that's selling the book? But I think the reason that indies, the high street's had a terrible time sort of the last 10 years with the internet stomping all over everything. But the indies that have survived have done so because they have been fleet of foot. They've been really inventive. They've, around here, they've been doing sort of local deliveries and click and collect. And they've really worked hard to provide the sort of stuff that certain big online retailers can't do, that personal touch, So, it's been really, really gratifying. I know, we've put a lot out there, so it's up to me now. The next stage is to make sure we sell as many as possible.
Well, that's it, and it does. I mean, it's just the beginning, like we always say. Like the launch is the big event, the big moment. But now it's the kind of the long haul, and it's about promoting that book for the rest of your life, Mr. C. I mean, we know, but it is. Yeah. I mean, I still promote, I'm still promoting music I wrote 15, 20 years ago. It's like, you don't ever think of a book launch. And this is for our listeners out there that are thinking about launching their book. Don't make it all just about, or don't think that as soon as you've kind of announced that it's out and it's for sale, then you can just start writing your next book. It is an ongoing process. And you might find that, your book takes off a year down the road or 2 months down the road, but the continuous pushing of that book and opportunities is so important, which is why we still mention on this podcast 4 years down the road that if you haven't bought Back to Reality yet, it's available in more good bookstores. That's right. So I think one of the other things I saw, Mark, that I was really fascinated by was a post in I think it was in the BXP team, our kind of exclusive group for patrons of this podcast. And it was of someone who said that they were on a book club of theirs. I have a book club online, and somebody said, I don't know which one of these 3 new books to read. I'm having stress over. And one of them was yours. And it was somebody completely unrelated to the group and the podcast that has just picked your book up randomly. And she forwarded this photo to the group, didn't she?
Yeah, and that's a really lovely sort of gratifying thing. I did suggest to her, instead of just picking one to read, she should read alternate chapters for each one, just to really mess with her mind. But
that'd be an interesting story.
I mean, that's the lesson you learn as an author is it's out there now. It's not my book anymore. It's their book, and they're reading it, and we're in the middle of a blog tour at the moment as well. Simon Schuster have organised a blog tour, and it's been great. For my ego, if nothing else, because you're getting 2 or 3 blogs every day.
Does that mean that people are writing blog posts about your book? It's not you appearing on, because it's obviously not live as such, but it's just a schedulized kind of releasing of reviews about or talking about, or have you done interviews with people as well? How does that work?
Well, one of them, they said, can you do a 10 things about me blog post? And instead I've done a video for them, which by the time this episode goes out, it should be live. And if it is, I'll pop a link in the show notes to it. But yeah, sometimes they'll ask you, can you write this? Can you write that sort of thing? But generally these have just been, well, I say just been reviews. They've been amazing reviews. And it's, we did a blog tour for the audiobook of Back to Reality, which was great. Yeah. We did a blog tour for The End of Magic. And this one has just been fantastic because I haven't had to organize it or chase people up about it. So that's been fun, and it's people are loving it. It's really really nice. It's people have their own take in it. Everyone's picking the stuff that they've enjoyed, and it's different things each time. So it's been a really, really, really lovely week. I'm going to come down with a bump. When you don't have a blog tour and suddenly people aren't saying nice things about your book. So you now have to, and obviously after, I've been collecting the quotes on a spreadsheet or the links to each blog, so that once all the hubbub has died down, then I can schedule some social media with the quotes to keep that momentum going.
And actually, that's a great tip, isn't it, for people? I mean, we've done that a fair bit with things like the 200 word challenge, quotes about, reviews about our book Back to Reality. It's something that we found if you don't do it when you see it, you're creating a really big job for yourself later on. It's like so easy, just a screenshot, grab, stick it in a Google Doc or something, and then it's all there. And so every single author should have that, because that actually, for me, that page of quotes and comments, the feedback that you get about your book, that is like that kind of box of letters that the teacher gets from the students that they kind of can dip into when having a really bad day and they think, oh, why am I doing this? They can open that little box and they can pull out those letters from those students and say, you won't remember me, but 20 years ago, you told me I should really try, I'm a really good writer and I just wanted to let you know, I just published my first book, that kind of letter. But to have that place, collect them as you go. And then, like you say, Mark, you've got kind of content for social media posts. Great for pitches if you're going to be pitching future books to publishers. Having those kind of testimonials, so important.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a Google spreadsheet with various tabs. So one just has things like all the buy links and the ISBNs. Because, it's one of those things where you go, oh, what's the ISBN of the book? So do I go to Amazon and scroll down, and then you discover Amazon doesn't show them anymore, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So I've got them all on a nice Google spreadsheet, along with things like people that we sent the book to for quotes, along with the social media quotes, along with, a sort of a launch plan as well. So it was all in one doc that I could share with everyone at Simon & Schuster, and they could dip into it and see what I was doing, and they could add their own stuff to that as well. It's this is kind of all the little things I've learned along the years, all the mistakes I've made. I've sort of put into this.
And it's really a good, important point, like being organized like that, especially around the book launch, because there's so much going on. It can save you a huge amount of time. So great tip. It really does, yeah. Excellent stuff. Now, we've got some really exciting news to announce for a couple of our listeners. Some really amazing things have happened to them this week. We're going to do that after our interview. And we're also going to be doing any social media. So if you've been kind of posting to us on Twitter, on Facebook, telling us about how you've been getting on with your books and the like, stick with us until the end of the show to see if you get a mention. But moving swiftly on, Mark, this week's interview is we're welcoming back a guest who we have had several times on the show already as deep dives, and now he has his feature spot on the Bestseller Experiment. So tell us about David Bishop.
Yes, this is David's hat trick. His third time on the show. So episode 109, which was a deep dive, he did a masterclass on writing comics. Episode 197, he talked about creative writing courses, but he's here today with his author hat on as D.V. Bishop. He's an award-winning screenwriter and TV dramatist. His crime fiction debut, City of Vengeance, won the Pitch Perfect competition at Bloody Scotland in 2018 and is now published by Pan Macmillan in a 2-book deal. He was awarded the Robert Louis Stevenson Fellowship by the Scottish Book Trust while writing the novel, and he's still program leader for the creative writing course at Edinburgh Napier University. And it's an absolutely fascinating chat.
Brilliant. So let's dive in and have a listen with Mark interviewing the wonderful D.V. Bishop.
David Bishop, welcome back to the Bestseller Experiment. How are you today, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me yet again.
Oh, our absolute pleasure. Our absolute pleasure. And, this is a real treat because today you've got your author hat on with a fantastic new book, the first in a new series set against the backdrop of the Medici dynasty in 1530s Renaissance Florence, City of Vengeance. And this sounds absolutely amazing. Tell us about this wonderful book, David.
So, it is my historical thriller crime debut, published in February 2021 by Pan Macmillan. And it tells the story of Cesare Aldo, who's an officer for the most feared criminal court in Renaissance Florence. But Aldo, although he's an officer of the court, he lives on the wrong side of the law due to his sexuality. Although they didn't have the term at the time, he's a gay man in a time and place where that makes him a criminal in the eyes of the law, which he enforces and upholds. And he investigates the murder of a Jewish moneylender. And in doing so, he uncovers a plot to overthrow Duke Alessandro de' Medici, the ruler of Florence in this period in history. And so Aldo has a challenge. He's basically got 4 days to try and solve this mystery. The question is whether he'll be able to stop the conspiracy or will his own secrets destroy him first.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful stuff. Now, I can see why this period appeals to writers, because there's everything going on here, isn't there? This is sex and violence and religion and sexuality, all these amazing things going on. Of course, the question we always love to ask writers whenever they're writing anything about any kind of historical period is the sort of research that you do and how you stop yourself putting it all onto the page. How did that work for you?
Well, gosh, I mean, researching this was years and years of effort. I mean, I picked up a book just by chance in a bookshop near the British Museum, and this is like maybe 20 years ago. And there was one sentence in it which just said that the criminal justice system in Renaissance Florence in this period, in the early 16th century, was roughly equivalent to a modern police force. And it was just like light bulb, ding, 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 ding. And that just sent me down a rabbit hole of research. And I spent years not writing this book because of simply I wasn't confident that I knew enough about the time and the place and the period. You know, I'm not Italian. I don't speak Italian. So in order to find any texts about the period, they all had to be into translation. So the challenge was, eventually I realized I could never know everything. And this is the thing with research. You can never know everything. And even if you do know everything, you can't put it all on the page, because that becomes these massive tomes that's just jammed full with everything you ever discovered. And the reality of research, I mean, it's a great procrastination tool and work displacement tool. But the reality is if 5% of the things that you discover end up on the page, that's probably still too much. Because I always have, I run the creative writing program at Edinburgh AP University in Scotland. And one of the things I tell my students is that your characters are only going to notice things that are new to them. So if they live in a place, then the only thing they're going to notice about the place possibly is the weather, or if something new has occurred or something is missing. We, human beings as animals, we only notice difference. We don't notice something that's the same day after day. So it's the same with research. You can't have characters wandering around observing everything, because that's simply not how we tend to see the world around us. And so it should be with your characters.
Absolutely. I'm fascinated by this idea of years not writing this, having that almost like a discipline to not jump in, because I think sometimes if you jump in too soon, it makes you realize just quite how much you don't know. Is that something you've experienced before?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the things that you don't know. It's the traps that you worry you're going to step into. And if you're doing anything that's specialized or has a specialist knowledge, it's the things that always leap out at you. I mean, I used to be a newspaper reporter literally last millennia. And it always fascinates me when I watch people depicting reporters from the 60s and the 70s, even into the 80s, and they're typing on actual manual typewriters. And then but if they don't use carbon paper, I'm like, how on earth did they make copies of anything? That's ridiculous. So it's those little details that people get wrong. And that if somebody has any expertise in a subject, that's what will pop you out of the book or the TV show. And so that's the thing that you worry about doing research, is that, will I get this wrong? Have I called this the wrong thing? So it was one of those things where you think, I can't leap into this too soon, because I know I could make a terrible Horlicks of it if I get it wrong. So I spent years sort of building up the confidence in myself as a writer before I wanted to tackle this, because I knew this was going to be, as it is, the start of a series. I wanted to do it justice. And it's often the ideas that you sit on and that you wait and that you hold back from writing that end up being the more complex stories to tell, because you give yourself a chance to think beyond that initial enthusiasm, that burst of excitement of ideas that you have when you get a new idea, and the temptation to rush and to write it instantly. Whereas if you can sit back and let it sort of, simmer away, then you will have the better idea that you build upon that initial impetus. There's a theory somebody once told me about if you make curries or chilies, how they're often better the second day because they've had a time for everything to marinate in. And I think storytelling's a little bit like that as well.
I think you're absolutely right, because the thing is, you have an idea, you have this idea of a concept, which is, okay, a Medici police force, fantastic. Then you do all this research, but of course, none of that is story, none of that is really character. When did the point come where you thought, actually, I've got a protagonist, I've got enough fuel in the tank for a story here? When do you know that point comes?
Oh, it's hard. It's hard to know. And also because I was writing this on spec, I've written a lot of tie-in novels in the past, and a lot of things to contract, as it were. Hired gun, inkslinger kind of writer is my past. And then I sort of set that aside and went off to become a screenwriter for a while. And then when I came back to writing prose, it was the challenge of, had I reached a point where I could write the book, and it was trying to force myself to start, actually, having held back for so long, standing beside the swimming pool, sticking my toe in the water, going, oops, still cold. Eventually you have to sort of, nobody was waiting for me to write this book except me, and I'd been talking about it for decades and boring my poor partner and other people with it. And finally I thought, just put up or shut up, Bishop. But in order to force myself to do it, I started a PhD in creative writing, and this book is the book that is the basis of my PhD, which I still haven't finished. The book's coming out next week as we record this. I still haven't finished the PhD. My apologies to the people of Lancaster University.
That's brilliant. How does that work then? How does that work? I mean, that's that is absolutely fascinating, this idea that it's part of your PhD and it's coming out before you finish the PhD. I mean, explain yourself, David.
Car, horse, stable door. It's all gone wrong. Most creative writing PhDs, people may have published sections of it, particularly if they're poets. They may have published chunks of it. It's the idea that somebody could write a novel on a creative writing PhD and it can have gone through the entire publication process, which, as you all know, is not necessarily the fleetest of foot. I signed the contract for this book in, I guess it was the summer of 2019. Yeah, that would be right. And it's coming out now. So it was a long wait for the book to be published and the editorial process and all the rest. And I was doing that whilst I was doing the PhD at the same time. It was not my plan. And I've been told, I've got a new supervisor now, but my previous supervisor told me that actually if you do a creative writing PhD and your book is published before you complete the PhD and present your dissertation and you have your viva, they call it, where you get sort of grilled for several hours, sometimes it can actually make the job harder for the examiners because they're like, well, the book's kind of done, really. It's been published. There's not much to talk about there. We can't really say, it's not publishable standard if somebody can hand you the hardback. So as a consequence, of course, a creative writing PhD is not just the book itself. You also have to do the critical element, the research, the examination of things. And that's the bit where I suspect the giant searchlight of doom will come sweeping in my direction.
You have to show you're working when you're doing a PhD. So were you feeding chapters to people for feedback, and how did the whole thing develop? I mean, are you an outliner? Do you just write by the seat of your pants? How did that actually work?
I mean, for a creative writing PhD, you're expected to submit work. I mean, I'm doing mine part-time. So you're expected, in my case, I was expected to submit something once a month, whatever it might be. That might be chapter notes, that might be, exploration of character, register or voice, whatever the case is, or actual draft chapters. So that's what I was submitting when I was doing my PhD and getting feedback from my supervisor, which was hugely helpful. It was one of the reasons why I did a a creative writing PhD. One was I would have somebody sort of effectively standing over me with the whip going, chapter, please. Because I was writing it, I wasn't under contract. It was entirely on spec. So it enforced deadlines upon me because, being a writer, the temptation to slack off, procrastinate, or just disappear down a YouTube research rabbit hole is strong in this one. So I wanted the discipline of having somebody expecting me to produce work, and also then to get the feedback along the way and to have my ideas challenged before, so the book would be in the best possible shape before it was ready to go out to an agent, because I needed a literary agent. I didn't have a literary agent at that point. So that was the purposes of that. But in terms of outlining, I mean, I had a very, very rough outline, but essentially I had a 5-act structure, because the first book, City of Vengeance, follows the timetable of history. It takes place over 12 days, and it follows real events that occurred in the winter of 1536 in Renaissance Florence. So the history provided my timetable, but then I had to structure a compelling, enjoyable, page-turning story around history. And history actually is all over the shop. History is really badly structured, as the past year has shown us.
Yes.
So, if you were writing this, you would do a better job of recent events, because people would go, "Oh, this is not credible. They cannot get that wrong again." But no, yes, they can. Leaving that aside. So I had a very rough outline of how I was going to write it. But previously, when I was doing sort of work for hire tie-in books, you had to do a complete chapter breakdown, moment by moment, everything that was going to happen in the story. And it's the same with screenwriting. I used to write for a show called Doctors on BBC One, a daytime medical drama, continuing drama series. And for that, you had to give beat by beat, moment by moment, scene by scene, everything that was going to happen in the story before you started writing an actual draft, before you got a contract. So that was my discipline. That's what I tended to do. And for this one, I thought, no, I'm going to give myself the freedom, or more freedom, because one of the problems sometimes, if you slavishly follow an outline or a synopsis, is that you don't give yourself as a writer the opportunity to have the better idea, to let those sort of moments of serendipity and all the happy accidents and the characters that wander in and suddenly make themselves known in your story. You've got to allow room for the better idea, rather than just following the sort of the template that you made for yourself a year ago. And events have moved on, and you've learned more about your characters and the world, and it's developed. And if you keep following the same rigid path, the danger is you end up with plot driving your characters instead of characters doing what they want to do and what they would logically do in a situation as events transpire. So an example in City of Vengeance was there's my central character, my detective, Cesare Aldo. He was investigating the murder of this Jewish moneylender, and he knocks on the door, and the Jewish doctor of the community at the time comes out and invites him in to ask his questions. And then Aldo sort of starts admiring the broadness of the doctor's shoulders and sort of going, "Oh, he's got very nice eyes." And I was going, "Well, this was not in the plot." But suddenly this romance blossomed out of nowhere in the book. And I was like, "Oh, okay, all right. Well, this is interesting. Let's see where this goes." And the character, Dr. Saul Orvieto, he's now a major character in book 1, and he carries on into book 2, which I'm just finishing drafting at the moment.
I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? It's all very well outlining something, but once you get those characters on their feet, interacting, making choices, living with the consequences, it can throw up some really interesting stuff that you kind of have to roll with, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. This is why I always when I every now and then I will re-listen to the episode of the Bestseller Experiment where Ben Aronovich tears you and the other Mark.
Thanks for
quite
that.
a new one, with the bizarre notion that you're going to write, or that you had written a 50,000 word outline for what I presume was a novel of less than 1,000 words. But, yeah, obviously you've learned from this experience.
Well, I was talking to Adele Geras about this for an episode that I'm not sure, it's probably coming out after this episode, so stay tuned, listeners, where she outlines very, very heavily as well. She does those outlines that are tens of thousands of words long, but she says for her, it's essentially doing what pantsers will do, doing what she's essentially doing a very, very detailed outline, which is essentially a kind of a thin first draft. So I'm not making excuses for myself, but everyone will have their own way of doing it. I mean, weirdly, I've gone completely the other way now. It's basically 3 pages of an outline and boom, off I go. So it's changed very, very dramatically for me. But
it's exactly what you say. I mean, and they were right. It's a massive spectrum. Okay, from the sort of Stephen King, I've got an idea for 2 guys, a car, and something weird in the boot, and I'm going to write a 1,000-page novel off the back of that, to John Irving, who's at the other end of the spectrum, who sounds like the writer you're talking about. And John Irving, who wrote, World According to Garp and Cider House Rules and Prayer for Oamini, he will plot everything down to the absolute nth degree before he starts writing, because he says then he can just concentrate on the language. He doesn't have to worry about what's going to happen next, or whose point of view the next scene is, or how I'm going to get out of this hole, because he's solved those problems before he started. So effectively it is like a pantser, as you say. It's like a pantser, a first draft for a pantser is trying to figure out what's going to happen. And then they go back and write the actual story, having learned about the characters, the world, and the narrative as they've gone along through that first vomit draft. So, I'm doing what you do. So the second Cesare Alde novel, which I think within a week of finishing the first draft, for that one, I deliberately, again, it's a crime story, but I thought, right, I'm going to try the Ian Rankin method of I have no idea who done it. Right. So I literally got to, I think it was yesterday, I got to 122,697 words, and I had to type the sentence that had the name of the person who done it in it. And I went, okay, who's it going to be? Eeny, meeny. and I went, you're right, it's them. The second book is set in a convent, and the big reveal in the book is that they walk into the scriptorium and discover the dead, naked body of a man who's been stabbed 27 times and is covered in blood. And they're like, well, he shouldn't be here. And thus the mystery is set in motion. But yeah, I had no idea who done it until yesterday afternoon. Was like, all right, okay. I mean, I'd lined up some candidates, and finally I went, it's you. Okay, there we go. So I suspect I've got some rewriting ahead of me to tie that off and justify the decision I've made. But, the readers of the finished novel will never know any of that.
They won't see the joins, will they? That's the trick, to go back and make sure no one sees the joins. Yeah. It's really interesting to me, because I'm thinking the process of both books is drastically different. I mean, when you're writing, and I've just finished the second book in my series, and it's great because I know my protagonist and I know where I'm taking her. I know where I want her to end up. It's not as much of a process as discovery as it is in the first draft, which I'm sure you're finding with Cesare in this book as well. But also, the first book, you had that wonderful luxury of having that thing of giving it to someone and getting feedback very quickly, chapter by chapter as part of the PhD. Do you miss that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I was I didn't let anybody see a page of book 2 until I think I got to 80,000 words, and then just before Christmas, I gave the first 80,000 words to my agent to have a read of over the Christmas break if she was feeling brave, and she said very nice things when she read it, so that was fine. But it was sort of. I mean, of course, once you've written a book in a series, the first book in a series, you can do it. You've written stuff before. You have a level of competency and confidence in your craft and ability as a writer to pull things off, at least hopefully. I mean, we're all, the long dark tea time of the soul comes for all of us as writers at some point in the course of a novel where you go, oh, why? What am I doing? But, you just have to push through and go, well, this bit's going to be a bit sticky. And I mean, I was worried. I seem to recall I was a little worried about the pacing of this one. But I've had, so my agents read the first 80,000 words. I gave my editor the first 30,000 words to have a quick look at, just because he needs to decide what it's going to be called. I'm terrible at titles at transcribers.
Right.
Should not have come as a surprise. Almost everything I've ever written has had a different title stuck on it by somebody in the process. They should not let me write titles at all. But yeah, so it is that thing of, and of course the second book syndrome is because it's, you've had however many years to write book one in a series, and then suddenly it's book two. And now you've got a year, because you said you'd write a book a year, and that's the nature of series publishing and series fiction, is that the ability to produce another book. So that becomes its own challenge, and you have to have confidence in yourself and a certain momentum. But yeah, as you say, you've done some of the hard work. You've invented this character. You've created the world. You're starting to build a supporting cast of characters. I mean, often some people don't make it from book one to book two. And this one, the challenge I had with this one, because it's set inside a convent, I had to invent an entire world of the convent and then all the nuns to populate it. And they all had to have personalities and faces and, plus the challenge of describing a nun is that they all look exactly the same except for the face and the hand. That's all you've got.
It's true.
So I'm like, why possessed me?
So what's next for you, David? Because looking at, you've been on the show twice already, and it's extraordinary. You've written comics, you've written screenplays, you've done courses, you've, all sorts of extraordinary stuff, and you're still doing a PhD, apparently. Will we be seeing more from Cesare?
Yes. Like I say, I've been writing book two during lockdown. Ironically, during the book, the nuns all get enclosed in their convent and are not allowed to go outside. I can't think what inspired that. So yes, book two, which currently has the working titles of either Blood, Nuns and Consequences, which is not going to be the title, or And Then There Were Nuns, not going to be the title.
I can see why they don't let you near the titles. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, tonally that would not really capture the book either. So book two, Cesare Aldo 2, as yet to be titled, is due out in February next year, just after the paperback of book one comes out. And then, of course, it's dependent upon sales as well. There's a book three, welcome to publishing. So, yeah, once I finish book two, then back to my PhD, because I had to suspend studies on that for 6 months, to finish book two, and also because of the course I teach went online very suddenly thanks to lockdown. We've had to reinvent the entire program for fully online delivery, which has been its own special challenge. I mean, I'm lucky in that it's a postgrad program. Everybody who takes our program is grown up. So it's not like, my heart goes out to primary school teachers trying to teach 7-year-olds at the other end of a laptop that may or may not be working, depending upon Russian malware. So yeah, that's a tough job to have. And then, so book two's finished, back to the PhD, still teaching 4 days a week. And then my other job is I have an original graphic novel, which I've co-created with an artist called Rory Coleman. And we are going to be, hopefully, launching that as a Kickstarter, probably March or April of this year, just depending upon how things go. So that's in my copious spare time. I'm going to be doing a Kickstarter project.
Fantastic. Well, look, come back again. Let us know how that went. Take us through the whole process. We love this. We love your adventures, David. Thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. And folks, City of Vengeance out now. Get in there. Have fun in Florence 1536. It's all very, very bloody. So enjoy. And David, speak to you again soon.
Thank you very much.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book, quitting the day job, becoming a best-selling author? Well, over 4 years, we've studied the advice of over 300 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 500 million books. And we are excited to announce the Bestseller Academy. If you're ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, and coaching, your bestseller dreams are now only a click away. To find out more and apply, visit bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. Do you know, you have to be a certain kind of incredible / insane person to want to do a historic novel?
Well, as he said, history is really badly structured, and it's funny because I'm writing a short story at the moment, which is set in an historical period, and what you try to look for are the gaps in history. The bits where if someone, that someone was here, there, and someone was there, and then you got a couple of days gaps, or, there was something, there's a bit of mystery here. So can you slip that in and create your own reality in between the cracks of history? That's the thing I like doing. But you've got to, you've got to get it right, because otherwise people will bring you up on it.
I have so much respect. Like, listening to that interview, I know we've talked to a lot of incredible authors who write, novels set in different eras, and we've talked a lot about the amount of research and time that goes in to actually getting things right. But listening to David, it's something really clicked today. I thought, you have to be so fascinated by that era if you're going to go like what we did when we did some. I mean, I remember doing research for Back to Reality, but it was things like diving into some of the weird stuff about pyramids, for example, and it was so much fun because it gives you so many ideas. But we were using that almost in a fantasy sense. We were taking something that happened in history and thought, how can we play with that and have some fun with it in a fantasy sense, which is total license to not have to stick to the rules. But historical novels and research, and I know you did a lot as well for your Crowfolk book as well, Mark, around the war, but it really does, it's a whole other discipline alongside writing the book. I mean, I see it as like you write the book, but then there's this whole other massive project of like learning about the era that you want to focus on. Yeah, you've got to be passionate about it and want to go there again and again and again, and it's and without wearing all that wearing it lightly on your novel, without drowning the book in oh, look how clever I am with the research. And I think that's something David's done really brilliantly with this. Certainly if you read the reviews, you like to feel that you visited a place, that you've been there, that you got the smells and the textures and the atmosphere and everything, but you're not being lectured, you're not being bored by by some dry lecture on the period. So it's a really, really fine line to walk. Yeah, it's a bit like being a tour guide, isn't it, as opposed to presenting something in a museum. That's the way I think of it. It's like you go in on the bus tour with them, and you're getting all of the senses enlightened. So I think it's incredible. But one thing that did strike me, and I never thought of this before, and this is what I love about these interviews, is there's always something which makes you see something in a completely different way. David just popped into the chat you had about how people that lived in that era didn't notice the normal things, which for us, looking back, would have been completely, would be the kind of highlights of, wow, look at the, technology they had back in the 1500s, for example. And I just suddenly thought, actually, from writing a book's perspective, that's a massive challenge, isn't it? Because as the author, you want to say, oh my gosh, they were doing these crazy things, but that might have been normal for them. Yeah. And that applies as much to science fiction and fantasy as well, where you don't want your character saying, hey, I'm going to shoot you with my ray gun, which fires these laser beams and does this and blah, blah, blah. Or I've got this magic sword that does this and blah, yada, yada, yada. And, it needs to be every day. It needs to be something that's ordinary to them. And it's the trick is to somehow fold that into the story. I mean, one of the wonderful things about watching something like Star Wars was nothing was ever explained. No one ever said, this is what hyperspace is. Well, actually, tell a lie, Han Solo did. And it's a brilliant bit of exposition, because he says it's not like dusting crops. You get something wrong, you fly straight into a supernova. And that's all you need to know. And it's in a really exciting bit. But no one explained how anything worked. Yeah, like a lightsaber. Like, how did that turn on? Exactly. Right. Exactly. It just worked. It just worked. Never run out of batteries. Like, what was all that about? That would have been a brilliant moment. And then like, oh crap, I forgot what the fat ones. You've got the fat ones. Hans, what are the fat? Got any double A's? Yeah. What? No. We need the fat ones. What are those ones? The D's? Is C. It? The C. Yeah. No one sells C's anymore. And meanwhile, you got the stormtroopers standing there going, what the bloody hell are they talking about? That would be a brilliant scene. You see, that would be a good scene in Star Wars. They missed out on one there, didn't they? I don't think it would. I'd love that though. Yeah. Just like trying to turn it on. Like what? They never have they ever done that? You're a Star Wars buff. Have they ever done a lightsaber scene where the lightsaber doesn't actually turn on?
They've done it in the books.
Ah, see, I knew you'd know this kind of thing. Right. Challenge to George, if you're listening. I think what we want somebody.
George isn't running the show anymore. George is retired. Yeah,
I know. Yeah. But maybe you can still put a mention in and just say, yeah, actually, we need to use that. And so when we see it, we'll say, look what we did, Mark. You see that in the anyway. But yeah, C batteries.
Available from late night garages everywhere. But the death of narrative are the words "as you know." Okay, so if you've got two characters and they're saying, as you know, the Medici, blah 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 blah. I mean, that's gonna kill your story because So you've got to figure out ways to weave it in. The example I always give actually is George Lucas again. Although probably Lawrence Kasdan should be credited with this, is in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where there's this expositional scene which is so brilliantly done you don't notice it, and it's where the two Secret Service guys turn up at Indiana Jones's college, and they want to know about the Staff of Ra and Abner Ravenwood and the Ark of the Covenant and everything. And in lesser hands, they would have sat down and said, Indiana Jones, right, here's what we want you to do. We want you to find the Staff of Ra. Here's this guy, Abner Ravenwood, and blah, and explain it all to him. What they do is they get it wrong, and he explains it to them. They come in and say, we think Abner Ravenwood, we think he's a Nazi spy. I say, no, he's not. And the Staff of Ra, and he says, and he explains it to them. He corrects them. So not only are you getting all the exposition you need, not only does your hero have agency, but you're also, leaning forward and going, okay, you've got a bit of conflict there as well. He's telling these guys and he's proving that he's the best guy for the job. And it's so brilliantly done. It's one of the best examples of exposition I've ever seen.
That's excellent stuff. Brilliant. Excellent stuff. What else jumped out for you, Mark, in that interview? Because you've interviewed David a few times now.
Yes, well, I thought trouble with titles was an interesting one, and it's interesting that because I get quite precious about titles, and the film I've written is getting a title change, and I can't reveal what it is yet. There's going to be some sort of announcement.
I wondered if that might happen. I did wonder if that might happen.
Yeah. So that's changing. So it's always interesting. And, of course, we had this a few weeks ago as well with a Rich Leader who was saying that of, all the few dozen or so screenplays he's ever written, I think he said like 3 or 4 ended up with the title that he started with, that always have title changes. So it's great that he's not too precious about titles. And, of course, the old debate about outlining, pantsing, it's all there for you to listen to. I mean, it's interesting. Even David still remembers the Ben Aronovich episode.
I know, it just comes up almost every week, doesn't it?
I swear that if I get any kind of fame, if there's any kind of obituary, I swear that bloody Ben Aronovich episode is going to be in there.
Your Wikipedia entry, Mark, when you snuff it, it's just going to say the bloke that was bollocked by Ben Aronovich. That'll be it, right? But the interesting thing is that when, again, another kind of moment where it's this blurring of plotting and pantsing. I mean, there's this wonderful debate, and we know that there is not kind of like a kind of a hard and black and white line between you're either this or that, you're something in the middle. But I do like the idea that you can pants an outline. You can pants an outline that you're plotting. I love that idea. It's like, well, why can't we all just make peace instead of having like, I'm a plotter, just all make, make love, not war, right?
Amen.
If you're pantsing, then you're pantsing your plot, right? Yep. And if you're plotting, then you probably pantsed it in your head already, or you're pantsing it as you go. I mean,
we've got a couple of episodes coming up. Adele Garas, who gets a mention in this, she work the way I work, which is she does really detailed outlines, but she said essentially all she's doing is writing a very, very thin first draft. And then we've got Dean Wesley Smith a couple of weeks after that, who writes in the dark. He has no clue where he's going. I'll tell you what, subscribe just for that episode, folks. Really? Dean Wesley Smith, probably coming middle of May. Just extraordinary interview. I love him to bits.
When you said writing in the dark, I instantly thought of those restaurants. There was a restaurant that opened up here locally recently, and it was the Dark Restaurant. It was ran by a guy who was actually blind. as well. It was incredible. Unfortunately,
Brilliant.
it didn't make it through COVID because it launched it timing-wise. But I just suddenly had a thought of writers actually literally turning the lights off. If anyone's ever done that intro to art where you have to pick up a pencil, have you ever done this, Mark? You pick up a pencil and you have to imagine something in your head, but you're not allowed to look at the paper, and you try drawing it. It's actually quite incredible how bad it looks, but also actually how it does actually resemble the thing that you're imagining. And I wonder if here's a question: is there anyone out in the world that has ever actually written a book literally in the dark? They've actually so that they're turning off, their vision, so they're not having to focus on spelling errors, for example, and they just scribble. There must be someone that's done it. And if they haven't, everyone try it this week and tell us what it was like. Do one page of completely black, pitch black writing. Who knows? You might discover something interesting. Apart from a lot of ink on your desk.
Exactly, yes. Well, listen, talking of future episodes, do subscribe. We've got some amazing people coming up. We've got Linwood Barkley, ladies and gentlemen. We've got Mitch Ben. We've got Adele Garras. We've got Ellie Barker. We've got Andrew Hunter Murray, Dean Wesley Smith. We've got some fantastic names. Each of them completely different. Each of them has a completely different approach to writing. This is the thing I love about this podcast. There's no one way of doing it. They've all got their own way of doing it. You're gonna get something amazing from each of these. Do subscribe on your podcatcher of choice for this wonderful stuff.
And actually, for people that technically are, what's a subscribe? I've never actually said this ever on the podcast. Well, how do you subscribe to a podcast? Well, if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, there is a subscribe button near the top of the page. You have to go to the Bestseller Experiment podcast on whichever, whether it's Spotify, Google, I think it's YouTube Music now, any of those different. And if you get one of these apps where it's like an Android app or an iPhone app, and you've got tons of different, you can choose everything in that app. Again, look for the subscribe button. What that actually does, folks, is if you click on that, it will automatically deliver each new episode that we put live to your device or your computer, whichever you listen to us on. And so you don't have to think about it. We'll just show up, usually every Monday morning if you're in the UK, or Sunday evening if you're outside of the UK. And what that actually does for us, which is why we will always bang on about subscribing, is it actually increases the exposure that the podcast gets in all of these different worlds. So in terms of us trying to get out to more and more writers, if you subscribe, then you're also basically helping other writers discover the Bestseller Experiment, which we will love you for, and other writers will love you for. And we'll explain why, because there's a couple of writers that discovered us through the podcast and something amazing happened to them. Should we dive into that?
What a brilliant segue. What a brilliant segue.
Thank
Did
you
you
very
write
much.
that? That was fantastic. Well, this is, our supporters, we're just blown away by how they've done. When we started this podcast, we said to people, if you got a half-written book in a drawer, beat us to it, and our listeners are just amazing. And not one, but two of our listeners had some great news last week. The Romantic Novelists Association in the UK announced its shortlist for the 2021 Romantic Novel Awards. And two of our listeners and supporters, Kylie Dunbar and Elizabeth Hurley, were nominated, got their nominations. So Liz Hurley's book, A New Life for Ariana Byrne, published by Hera Books, is up for the Katie Ford Debut Romantic Novel Award. And One Winter's Night by Kylie Dunbar, also published by Hera Books, is up for the Romantic Comedy Novel Award. And, huge congratulations to both of them. Liz dropped us a line. She says, "Thank you, Marks. I found Hera Books through your podcast, so thank you again." And again, I'll put a link. We did a deep dive with Hera Books. I'll put a link in that for people who want to check that out. The Hera Books are just amazing. And Kylie Dunbar got in touch and said, "The Bestseller Experiment podcast helped me so much and continue to inspire me and keep me writing." So we have got everything crossed for Kylie and Liz. Huge congratulations to both of them. This is just, when we started this podcast, could we have imagined we'd have so many award nominees, award winners? I mean, the only ones who haven't won anything is us.
Right.
So,
you know what? I mean, what's with that, Mr. Stay, That could all change.
Speaks volumes.
That could all change. No, it's simple math. It's simple maths, Mark, right? We are spending so much time doing this podcast, we haven't got time to go out and, write as many books as we could do and submit these competition entry forms, right? That's why it is. I'm absolutely convinced of it. No, I think it's wonderful. I just want to congratulate Liz and Kylie as well. What I love about this as well is we've been following their story, joining as patrons originally. I think also, interestingly, being inspired by other successes that some of our listeners have had, namely in the romance area, Lorna Cook, who's gone on to have an incredible career, winning twice 2 major RNA awards, and I mean her career is absolutely blossoming. And this is what we always talk about on the show. This is not just about what we individually achieve. It's not about, when you write a book, it's not just about the amazing success of doing that one thing, getting to the end, even if it's never published. Just the fact that you've written a book is such a huge accomplishment in your life. But if you put it out there, what you're doing is you're inspiring other people to follow you. And that's what we've now seen. We've been doing this podcast long enough that we've seen Lorna kind of, torchbearer, who's gone out there and won all these awards. And, she started writing, with our podcast. That was how she got in. And she said, if it weren't for you, I would never have got my 6-figure crazy deal, I think she gave us as a quote. But now we see Liz and Kylie kind of, following in Lorna's footsteps, and it's growing. It's now 2, there's 2 of them that are now nominated. And I just love this idea that when you go for it, when you follow your passion and you say, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this not just for me, but I'm going to do it to inspire my kids. But you then don't know who else you're inspiring. And so thank you to everyone who's kept at this, that hasn't given up, that's kept going. And for everyone who's still struggling through that first novel, keep going. Because, once you get to the end, you've then got a shot at getting that book out. And then you've got a shot of inspiring other people to follow in your footsteps, which really, folks, I think that's, when you boil it down in life, that's why we're here. It's not about what we make. It's not about the how much money we make to the time we die, or the success we have. It's what we leave behind, what we inspire other people to do. So I just want to commend everyone who's out there slaving away every single day, banging their heads against a brick wall, because it's hard, but it's worth it in the end. So keep going.
Well, let's, we've got our 200-word challenge where we say to people, we all lead busy lives, difficult lives, some more difficult than others, but find the time just to write 200 words a day and see what happens. We had a tweet from Norfolk Days, who is at Simple Simon Say 9. They've managed over 3,300 words last week, already surpassing that this week. Have to say, the advice from Mark's Day about stopping mid-sentence has really helped. The 200 words a day minimum aim has also been a godsend. Now, I just need to put out that ... Brilliant. Finish mid-sentence. See, that's one of my little tips, which is when I was commuting to writing on my commute, I would sort of, because you'd feel so exhausted, and the train would be coming into the station, and I would just pretty much finish mid-sentence. But when I took the train home, I would just finish the sentence, and before I knew it, I was typing again, and it really helped keep that momentum going, when working around a day job. So congrats on that, Norfolk Days. And public declarations, they're another thing we say that works really well. Andrew Chapman, he made a public declaration to complete the first draft of his Western, Hell's Ridge, by Wednesday, the 3rd of February. He sent us a message at 2:42 a.m. He says, I'm calling it Wednesday. He's still, even though it's technically Thursday morning, and he's just typed the words at the end on the first draft of Hell's Ridge.
Wow.
He says, now to hide it away for a month while I write the next one. Now, Andrew is a big inspiration in the Bestseller Experiment group. He is someone who just keeps on going, keeps writing, keeps putting it out there. It's just a matter of time before he writes some smash hit. So congrats on that, Andrew.
Keep it going, man. Well done, Andrew. And if there was ever an example of why public declarations work, coming in like within an hour or two of that day and that time is absolutely phenomenal. Congratulations, Andrew. That's brilliant.
Wonderful stuff. So drop us a line, folks. Get in touch. We're on Facebook, Bestseller Experiment, Twitter and Instagram at BestsellerXP, or pop over to bestsellerexperiment.com where you'll see a contact tab and drop us a line there. We read all your emails.
Absolutely. And if you want to try the 200-word challenge, it will change your life. I guarantee it. You will write more words than you've probably ever written. Get over to 200wordchallenge.com. And if you're interested in learning more about the Bestseller Academy, then pop over to academy.bestsellerexperiment.com. You can put in an application now. The doors are not open. We are full currently, but we're saying to people, the wait list is now, get your application in now, get it in early, first come, first serve. Brilliant stuff. Well, listen, Mark, all the best in your next week of promoting the book on your blog tours, and hopefully some, who knows, this is the fun bit, isn't it? This is stuff where you don't know what's going to suddenly come out. Somebody's going to say something about your book, or you're going to get a phone call from your agent, or I love this period. So enjoy it, have loads of fun, and every success moving forward with the Crow Folk. I am stuck into it. I am enjoying. Right, yeah, cool. I'm loving the way you finished those chapters. You learned a few things, didn't you, on this podcast?
Along the way, yes.
Along the way, right? No, I do. I've got to say, I think one of the things I absolutely love about it is you keep me on the hook, you bugger. I'm there trying to get some sleep, and I'm like, just another chapter. I'm really enjoying it. It's a really good book,
cool
and
stuff.
It's really cool. It's different. It's totally different from. I mean, it's still you though. I can still like
I say, it's you, right? But it's cozy me. It's cozy me.
It's cozy Mark.
There's a slightly disturbing folk horror creep to it, but it's not as visceral as the other stuff I've done. But it's
great.
No, people are liking it. So
excellent. Well, enjoy all the success it's going to have. And for everyone listening to this podcast, all right, folks, listen, this is it. This is your life. Get writing. No more excuses. Get on the 200 word a day challenge. Make this happen. Get to the end, and then tell us all about it on this podcast in the future. So, to all of you, have an amazing writing week. Stay safe, stay warm, and be well. And it's a goodbye from Mark 1.
It's a goodbye from Mark 2.
Goodbye.
Bye. To read Back to Reality, the best-selling novel of the Bestseller Experiment by the two Marks, go to bestsellerexperiment.com/back to reality.
And subscribe to this podcast to get loads of extra bonuses. Go to bestsellerexperiment.com/subscribe.